Namaskar. Good morning.
Namaste, Rajiv. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Am I clear and audible?
Yes, very, very clear.
Okay.
Good to see you after quite a while.
Yeah. Good to see you too.
Yes, and I think everybody has started coming in. We'll just start on time in 5 minutes.
Sure.
And so this meeting is being recorded, and we will put a version of it on YouTube after due editing.
Yeah.
Wanted to make everybody clear. So everybody else other than Kalawai will mute themselves. I see some are not muted.
I think you can also mute all of them as meeting hosts.
Yeah, mute all of them, right.
Except towards the end when they want to ask questions.
Yeah, in the Q&A, they can unmute and ask questions.
Right. How do you want to do that? Do you want to let them ask questions as we go?
No. You
Okay.
do our format has been that you present and then they will ask questions.
All right. Sounds good. So my computer has its video camera placed at the most awkward angle. It's at the bottom of the bottom left of the screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So usually they put it right at the top center, right? So that's what they usually do. And Dell XPS2, when I bought it, I didn't notice the way the camera is located. Okay, so it's
Right.
left bottom to the very extreme.
Yes. So I think in Zoom you can put like a graphic in the background,
Mm-hmm.
so it appears that it's all proportionate.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, yeah, that's good.
Exactly.
Now you
But
are
we don't have any graphic, right? Because we have
angle.
Ganesha in the back end. So in the back, it's a
Okay.
How many are we expecting today?
Oh, we have over 100, about I think 130 registrations.
Okay.
And then yeah, so we'll see. Some come obviously late. So
Yeah.
that is, but we'll start on time.
Do we have any limit on Zoom? There's no limit, right?
No, there's no limit. So you have your PowerPoint, right?
I do.
Yeah, okay. So what you are going to do is you can just go and share your screen.
Let us check and make sure the PowerPoint, everything looks good.
Right. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, I'll make it live on YouTube. I'm in YouTube as well as Facebook. So just give me 1 minute here.
Namaskar, Verma ji.
Yeah. Namaskar, everybody. Namaskar.
Namaskar, Kalavi ji.
Namaskar. Let me know when you can see the screen.
Yes, we can see the screen. So we are looking for an alternative to Zoom, but none of the solutions that we have tested are like as scalable or have the features. But the hunt is still on. So we'll stick to Zoom until we find a replacement.
Yeah.
Rajiv ji, Kalawai, Namaskar.
Namaste. How are you?
Doing good. Long time see you. I last saw you St. Joe's in Rajiv ji's Global Dharma Service Award Conference.
That's true. It has been several years. Nice to meet you, Rahul ji.
Namaste.
Just give me 1 second, okay?
Yeah.
All right, I'm back.
Okay. So just about getting ready to start now, 1 minute. And it's going to be live on Facebook as well as YouTube. And we'll send a link out, but you can focus on your presentation.
Awesome.
Okay. So
Hello, Raju ji, can you hear me?
yes, we can hear everybody at this time.
Yes.
So
Aditya Topatkar, namaskar to all.
yeah, namaskar, Aditya.
Namaste, Aditya ji. This is Kalavai.
Yes. I had an audio problem initially. I was not able you were all not able to hear me. I was able to hear Kalavai and you.
Okay, got it.
Yes, namaskar to Kalavai too.
Namaskar.
Okay, it's 2 minutes after. Namaskar, everybody. We are welcome you to the Global Hindu Online Panchayat. In this era of or time of global crisis, we are utilizing our stay-at-home time to get to know things that are going on in the global Hindu world. So today, in this edition of Global Hindu Panchayat, well, first of all, everybody is still staying at home and staying safe from this virus. But today, our topic is a much more deadlier and a deadlier virus that has been with us for the last 2000 years without any vaccine so far. And it has claimed, millions and millions of more lives. And on top of that, it has destroyed civilizations. And yet it has able to present itself as some kind of a benign, non-harming force in today's contemporary world. So to unravel this mystery, it is like peeling an onion. So we'll go through multiple presentations. And to start this process, we have Kalavai Venkat today with us, author, commentator, researcher, and with a very sharp and incisive mind. And he has been empowering Hindus for a very long time. I've been associated with him for the last 25 years now. And he's the author of What Every Hindu Should Know About Christianity. And his second edition will soon be out too as well. So without much loss of time, I will hand it over to Kalavai and you can go through his presentation. Welcome, Kalavai.
Namaste, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Rajiv. I hope I am able to live up to all the nice words you said of me. The topic today is, did Jesus really exist? As a Hindu, the first question that should come to your mind is, how does it matter? Because when we go to Mata Vaishno Devi in Jammu and Kashmir, we never ask, did Mata Vaishno Devi exist? And when was she born? Where did she live? Or if we go to Madurai Meenakshi temple, we do not ask, did goddess Meenakshi really exist? Because at the very core, Hinduism is very dharma focused, right? It's a very dharmic religion. And then it's the experience, it's the message, it's the teachings that matter more to us than the historicity of the people who may have founded the religion, or who may have contributed to that, or those who may have contributed philosophies or the gods and goddesses we worship. And this is even true of the various philosophers who founded separate schools of philosophies. For example, if we take Adi Shankara, we do not go about worrying too much about the historicity of Adi Shankara. So if you take two of the leading Shankara mats, the Sringeri Matha and then the one in Kanchipuram, they do have very different dates. Rajiv, I'm hearing a lot of echo. If somebody is not muted, can you please mute yourself?
Yes, yeah. Everybody mute yourself other than the speaker, please.
Thank you. And towards the end, we'll open up for Q&A. At the time, everyone can unmute and ask questions. So even when we take a philosopher like Adi Shankara, we do not really focus too much on the historicity of the person. So if you take the Kanchi mat, it comes up with a very different date for the existence of Adi Shankara than does the Sringeri mat. So the reason for that is, in Hinduism, historicity is very secondary. In most of the cases, it does not even matter. What is it with Christianity? And why is it we should worry about, or we should ask the question around the historicity of Jesus, and we should even bring up the question of whether Jesus really existed? This is a quote from the Bible, from the New Testament. This is by the Apostle Paul in the 1 Corinthians 15:14. If Christ has not been resurrected, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. Here the Apostle Paul is addressing the earliest Christians in the state of Corinth. And then he is telling that Jesus was resurrected, and it's a truth claim. And if it is not true, then my preaching to you is useless, and you don't have to believe in Christianity one bit. So in other words, the historicity of Jesus is necessary for Christianity. There are three fundamental beliefs of Christianity. And to sustain all of those three, the historicity of Jesus is a precondition. Number one, Jesus must have been born of a virgin. Number two, he must have died by crucifixion. Number three, he must have been resurrected 3 days later. So there are other faith claims that Christianity makes, but these three are absolutely essential. For all of these three to be true, the historicity of Jesus is absolutely essential. In other words, Christianity presents a criterion of falsifiability. And what does this mean? This is something you come across in science all the time. You make a claim, and then that claim can be verified with evidence, and it can be proven true or false. So Christianity is presenting one such claim, and then we can either prove it true or we can prove it false. In other words, if we can prove that Jesus existed as a historical person, then going back to the previous statement of Paul, then it's worthwhile for somebody to believe in Christianity. But if the historicity of Jesus is false, then Christianity is completely falsified too. So when we talk of the historicity of Jesus, the very first question to ask is, what are the contemporary references? What is the time period we are looking at? The time period we are looking at is somewhere in the first part of the 1st century. So according to the Christian accounts, Jesus was born somewhere between 4 and 7 BCE, before Common Era, and then he was crucified around 30 CE. So he lived around 30 years of life. So that means starting from around 25, 30 years of the 1st century, 25 to 30 CE of 1st century, we should start seeing some contemporary references for Jesus. And why is it important? It's because according to the Bible, during the last 1 to 1.5 years of his ministry, Jesus was a very public figure. He traveled around everywhere. He caused a lot of confusion. He challenged the religious authorities. There are some of the verses, he is even asking his disciples to take up arms and then to resist. So who is he referring to by resisting? We do not know, but then Romans were the ones who were colonizing Judea, or what we call Israel today. And then it could be a challenge to the Roman Empire too. And then during the last Passover, before he is crucified, Jesus comes riding into the city of Jerusalem on 2 donkeys. And then there is a lot of challenge. He goes to the temple and then he overthrows the tables of the money changers. In every sense, whether it is the religious authority or the secular authority, according to the New Testament, Jesus is challenging all of them. That's a very public figure. So if such a public figure existed, and if he performed miracles, and if he had a lot of followers, then one must expect to see evidence and references to Jesus in contemporary accounts. And this contemporary period is the first half or the second half of the first century CE. So there are two types of references we should expect from the contemporary period. One is the pagan writers, and the word pagan comes from pagani. It's a Latin word which refers to the non-Christian people. By and large, it referred. So the early Christianity was pretty much an urban religion. It was in the cities of the Roman Empire, and then they contemptuously they referred to the suburban people or the village people or the rural people as pagani. And the pagan writers uh, wrote a lot. And then many of those have been summarized by Professor G.A. Wells, and I'm going to go through a few of those summaries, and then we'll see whether any of those really refer to Jesus. First of them, who is very important, is Pliny the Younger. So the Pliny the Younger wrote around 112 CE, and then he wrote to Emperor Trajan. So he writes about Christians, and he says Christians assembled at daybreak and they sang hymns to their God. It's a very innocuous reference, and then it's just a passing reference. It means Christians existed by the turn of the 2nd century, but it does not prove that Jesus existed. So it's quite possible that a Christian cult had come into existence, and then they believed that a Jesus existed, but that Jesus could very well have been a mythical person and not a historical person. To give an example, if we go back and look at somebody like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who lived about 120 years ago, we find a couple of things. We find a lot of historical accounts, but we also find a lot of hagiographic accounts which are not historical in nature. And even though we are only separated by about 120 years, we cannot say for certain anything about Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, except a few direct testimony coming from Swami Vivekananda and others. So you go back a little further in time, take somebody like Shirdi Sai Baba or Bhakta Kabira and others, or even Meera. We do not know anything about them as historical persons, right? We have their dohas, we have their writings, we have their bhajans, but then beyond that, as a historical person, we do not know a lot about them. So we are living in a modern era where we can go back and check a lot of historical facts. Even then, it's difficult for us. So go back 2000 years ago. The early Christians would have had no way of going and verifying whether Jesus really existed 100 years back in the state of Palestine or Judea or Israel. And then they would have just believed it based on the information they received from others. So the reference to Christians in the writings of Pliny the Younger does not prove the historical existence of Jesus. The second reference, which Professor G.A. Wells summarizes, is that of the writings of Suetonius. Suetonius was once again writing around 110, 120 CE, and then he writes about a historical incident that happened way back during the reign of Emperor Caligula. So Emperor Caligula reigned during 41 to 54 CE, and then he talks about a Chrestus who led a revolt in the city of Rome against Emperor Caligula, and then the revolt was put down and this person was executed. Is this Chrestus referring to Jesus? The answer is no. First reason is because according to the New Testament, Jesus died around 30 CE. That means he could not have been alive and led the revolt around 41 to 54 CE. Second reason is even Christianity does not refer to Jesus as Christus. They call him Jesus Christ, and the word Christ means a Messiah or a Savior. And then Christus is not an appellation. Chrestus is a first name. And then in the Roman inscriptions of that period, there are at least 80 persons by the name of Chrestus. So this is referring to a Chrestus who led a revolt against the Roman Empire, and he was executed. So it is not a reference to Jesus. Third one, this is very famous. This is very popular in most of the Christian accounts. Christians always allege that the Emperor Nero, around 64 CE, persecuted the Christians. There was a fire in Rome, and Christians were suspected of starting that fire. And then Emperor Nero uh, tied them to lamp posts, and then he set them ablaze. So this is the account that has come down from the Christians. And then that's why you also come across the phrase, Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned. Of course, that's not really what happened. In all likelihood, Nero was not even present in the city of Rome when this fire happened, so he could not have played the fiddle. But more importantly, is this account true? So number one, this was written around 120 CE by Tacitus, the Roman historian Tacitus. He talks about what happened during the regime of Nero about 60 years ago. So Tacitus most of the times did not bother to check a lot of historical facts before he reported. And more importantly, in the case of Christianity, he had total contempt for that religion. So he did not really care to check a lot, and he just passed on uh, a story that uh, the Christians are persecuted. But even if Christians are persecuted, it does not prove the historicity of Jesus. Because even if Jesus was a mythical person, a sect of Christians could have existed, but that does not mean a historical Jesus existed. But in this case, even this persecution is unlikely to have happened because a lot of early Christian fathers like Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and Origen, they wrote a lot about the alleged persecution of Christians. But none of them mention about Nero persecuting the Christians in 64 CE. And Tertullian in particular talks about Nero persecuting the Apostle Paul and Peter. But he does not mention this persecution and killing of a large number of Christians by the Emperor Nero, which he would have had it really happened. And third, in the Acts of Apostle, Paul himself claims that he went and preached in Rome with all boldness, with nobody forbidding him. In other words, he was preaching during the regime of Emperor Nero, and he was preaching in Rome, and he says he was doing it boldly, and nobody forbade him. In other words, Nero was not really persecuting them as a sect of people, and this account is not a true account, and it was invented much later. So effectively, there is no pagan reference to Jesus in the first century or even in the earlier part of the second century, which is something we should expect to see if Jesus had really existed as a historical person. Now let's turn to the Jewish evidence. That's the other one you should look for. Did the Jews make any reference to Jesus? The most important writer of that period is Josephus. So Josephus was a Jewish commander. He took part in the revolt against the Roman Empire. He was defeated, he was captured, and then he was taken to the Roman court where he became a historian and a scribe. So he wrote two books. The first of them is the Jewish War. It covers the period of Jewish history from 175 BC to 73 CE. It makes no mention of Jesus. The second book he wrote is called The Antiquities of the Jews. This book allegedly makes two references to Jesus. The first one of them, as you can see here, you can read it verbatim, but it talks about a Jesus, and then it says he was a wise man, and then he performed many miracles, and then many of the Jews and even the Hellenistic people are the Romans, Greeks, and those of Alexandria who are pagans. They were converted over to his cult, and then he was called Christ. I'm putting it in bold because Flavius Josephus, according to this testimony, called Jesus Christ. So he was condemned to cross and he was crucified to death. So this is the testimony coming from Josephus, and is this true? First one, Origen was an early church father. He lived towards the later part of the 2nd century and the early part of the 1st century. He was given a very important task of writing a book called Contra-Celsum. Celsus was a pagan philosopher who was uh, very critical of Christianity. He called Jesus a fraud. And then he also said the Christians were making up stories and they were spreading superstition. And he was a fierce critic of Christianity. His book has not survived. However, Origen was tasked by the church to write a rebuttal to the writings of Celsus. So that book is called Contra Celsum. In Contra Celsum, Origen says Joseph did not accept Jesus as Christ. Go back to the previous page. Here, the Josephus testimony that has come to us, that has survived and that has come to us, says in bold, as you can see here at the bottom, he says he was Christ. Okay, according to this, Josephus called Jesus Christ. And if he had really done so, then Origen, writing just 100 years later, would not have said Josephus did not call Jesus as Christ. Second book, a second testimony comes from uh, Irenaeus. He was one of the church fathers, Tertullian, whom we saw earlier, and the Clement of Alexandria. All of them wrote in the 2nd century CE. None of them cite the testimony of Josephus, which they would have because they were all the time debating the pagan adversaries. And they were debating Celsus, then subsequently they were debating Porphyry and all the other powerful adversaries. And all of them were challenging the historicity of Jesus. And all of them were saying that he was a mythical figure. And then they made up a story and they were all debunking Christianity. So this would have been a very powerful testimony for Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Clement of Alexandria to quote if Josephus had really written those words. But none of them cite that. It's also very important for them to cite because in the early part of the 2nd century, there was a lot of rivalry between Gnostic Christianity and what we call the Orthodox Christianity. That became the Roman Catholic Church. So these two were conflicting and fighting each other all the time. And of course, there are other sects like the Arians and others, but these two were the prime rivals at that time. And according to the Gnostics, Jesus was not an earthly figure. He was not a historical figure. Whereas according to the Orthodox Christian Church, Jesus was a historical figure. And once again, the Orthodox Church, which Irenaeus, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, all of them represented, they all would have cited the testimony of Josephus if it had really existed, because that would have silenced the Gnostics. It would have told them, look, Jesus existed as a historical figure. He was crucified, and we have the testimony of Josephus. None of them do that. The entire chapter, which we just cited, is about the misfortune of Jews. There was a lot of rivalry between the Jews because they were colonized and they were indulging in insurrection against the Roman Empire. And every time the Romans put down any such insurrection with brute force. And that meant a lot of death and destruction for the Jewish people. And this chapter is about the misfortune of the Jews. And then there is no need for talking about Jesus in this entire chapter. And the fourth reason is Josephus was a Pharisaic Jew. Pharisees are very orthodox Jews, and Josephus was one, and he lived and died as a very orthodox Jew until the end of his life. And the Jews did not accept Jesus as a Messiah. And the word Christ also means Messiah. So there is no way he could have called Jesus Christ. In other words, all of these are pointers that Testimonium Flavianum, which is the writing attributed to Josephus, is an interpolation. It was interpolated after the time of Origen, because right on top, Origen says Josephus did not accept Jesus as Christ, whereas the version from Josephus we have got calls Jesus Christ. So this was an interpolation made sometime in the 3rd century after the time of Origen. The second reference Josephus makes is about James, brother of Jesus. So here it's about there is a Jewish body called Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin or judges, it's a judiciary body. They have the right to try anyone for committing religious or sometimes even secular crimes and then to punish them. So they are punishing a person, and this is the version that has come to us from Josephus in book number 20. And the version that has come to us is uh, a person by name James, and uh, he is the brother of Jesus. He um, made he was charged by the Sanhedrin, and then the judge Ananus, he ordered him to be stoned to death. Okay, so since the Christian claim is, since he is referred to as brother of Jesus, historical Jesus should have existed and he should have been well known to everyone. Is it true? If James was stoned to death, we should find references to that in the earliest accounts of Christianity. Some of the earliest accounts are the Acts of the Apostles. It does not mention anything about the stoning of James. So if James had been stoned and if he was brother of Jesus, that's where you would expect to see reference to that. And it does not exist there. Hegesippus was an early church historian. He wrote in the 2nd century, and then he wrote the history of church in 5 volumes. And he does not say that James was stoned to death, and instead he says he died in a tumult. Origen writes in the late part of the 2nd century and the early part of the 3rd century. He discusses the same episode, but the words he quotes are not the same as what is present here. And he does not give the same passage as that has come down to us from Josephus. He cites Josephus, but then what he gives as citation of Josephus is very different from the version of Josephus that has come down to us in the top paragraph. And most importantly, Richard Carrier is an American historian. And then he says this chapter, 28th chapter, is about a sedition by the Jews and then the massacre that followed. And hence, there is no room to have a reference to Jesus. And it was very clumsily interpolated. So what is the real story about this chapter? Could it still be a reference to Jesus? Let's see. In this one, a person by name James is unjustly stoned to death by the high priest Ananus. Then the Jews become restive, and then the high priest is eventually punished by the Romans. First questions we should ask is, if this James was the brother of Jesus and if he was Christian, why would the Jews side with the Christians? Because the Jews and the Christians were rivals, and it's very unlikely that Jews would have protested against their own high priest and then sided with the Jews. Second, at that time, Domitian was the Roman emperor, and the persecution of Christians was legal. And if it was legal, why would the Romans punish the high priest Ananus for legally persecuting the Christians? If James was a Christian and if he was persecuted, then it was legal at that time. And why would the Romans have punished the high priest for doing something which was entirely legal? Third, this is a very important argument that Richard Carrier makes. He points out that Origen, who cites this incident, that's how it has come down to us. Origen had actually mistaken the writings of Hegesippus. Hegesippus was a 2nd century historian. He wrote 5 books on the commentaries of Acts, and Carrier makes a very decisive argument that Origen had mistaken the writings of Hegesippus for those of Josephus. Okay. Hegesippus was a very careless historian. He made up a lot of fantastic stories, and one of them was about James, the brother of Jesus, who was stoned to death. And here, Richard Carrier makes a very important argument. He says, Origen got a set of manuscripts on his hand, and he thought these manuscripts belong to the writings of Josephus. And then while he comes across the name of James, he is not sure who this James is. Then he makes what is called interlinear notes. So to give an example, today if you use Microsoft Word and then you are reading through something and then you do not understand something, the first thing you will do is you will go highlight that word and then you will go and drop a reference, right? Either as a footnote or as an endnote. But in those days when they were writing manuscripts, this feature did not exist. You cannot add footnote or endnote. So what everyone used to do was, as they were copying the manuscript or as they were referencing the manuscript, they came across a passage or a sentence, then they will write a note on the margins. It's called the interlinear notes. Okay. So Origen creates one such note, and then he comes across the word James, and then he says brother of Jesus in the interlinear notes. And that's how the entire myth that James, brother of Jesus, was persecuted came into existence. And what was the real story that Josephus wrote? The real story was about a person named Jesus ben Damnius. Okay, this Jesus ben Damnius had a brother by name James, and what is happening is this Jesus ben Damnius is a Jew, he's an Orthodox Jew, and then he is taking on uh, the high priest of the Sanhedrin, Ananus, and then Ananus now gets vengeful. He wants to punish Jesus ben Damnius. So there is a lot of tumult that results from this. And then James is a very minor character. He just happens to have the name James, same as the Christian apostle, but he is a very minor character in this episode. But Jesus ben Damnius is going into hiding, and then his brother James is instead punished as collateral damage and killed by Ananus. And then there is a lot of the Jewish crowd turns restive, and then the Roman authorities intervene, and then they punish Ananus, and then they restore the priesthood of Jesus ben Damnius. So this Jesus, whom Josephus wrote about, was actually a Jewish priest. He was a rabbi, and while copying the notes, Origen makes a very silly mistake of assuming the writings of Hegesippus were those of Josephus. Then he comes across the name James, and then he writes an interlinear note saying this is brother of Jesus, and then this myth gets propagated from there on. In other words, the two references to Jesus, which are alleged to have been written by Josephus, are both later day forgeries and interpolations. So long story short, you should expect to see a lot of reference to Jesus in the 1st century, or even in the early part of the 2nd century, but you do not. You do not find a single reference to Jesus in the writings of the pagan historians. You do not find a single reference to Jesus in the writings of the Jewish historians. And the fact that the Christian church had to forge and invent all of these references actually tells us that no such reference really existed. So from the very beginning, the historicity of Jesus was on very shaky grounds, and that's why the Christian church had to fabricate and forge all of those references. At this time, you'll ask one question. It's about what is called the logical fallacy of argument from silence. And it simply means, I've just given the definition here, but it simply means absence of evidence is not the same as the evidence of absence. For example, did your grandmother exist? Okay, so we cannot find really too many evidences outside of the stories your family will be able to tell, right? Because she may not have been a very famous person. She may not have had a very big following. So she may not have been a high functioning official. That means nobody really wrote about that. So if 100, 200 years later, somebody came and asked, did your grandmother exist? You won't be able to prove it. That's generally true. But there are also situations where absence of evidence is actually evidence of absence. So if you ask somebody, did Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or did Ramana Maharishi or did Narendra Modi ever exist? Okay, you will find a lot of references. Okay, number one, there will be contemporary accounts. Okay, number two, there will be some who are admiring them and there are some who are opposing them. Okay, especially true of political leaders. And Jesus was, according to the New Testament, not just a religious leader, not just a philosopher, but he was also a political leader because he was ushering in the kingdom of God on earth, and he was going to overthrow the Roman Empire or any of the temporal empires on earth. So that means he was also a political leader. So he had a lot of enemies. He had the Jewish enemies, then he had the Roman enemies, and all of them should have referred to him even in unflattering terms. And he had his own followers, and many of them wrote, and then many of them travel, and they all should have written about him. So in this case, you should expect to see evidence. And more importantly, since the early pagan philosophers were challenging the Christians about the historicity of Jesus, uh, if something was written, they would have all cited that. So in this case, absence of evidence is actually the evidence of absence of the historicity of Jesus. So you may be asking one question, why not treat the New Testament itself as evidence? Because New Testament is the only source that tells us about the story of Jesus, and Christians have preserved it for 2000 years, and why not trust it? And that's a big problem with it. First, New Testament is not an eyewitness account of the mission and ministry of Jesus. It was written over at least 3 centuries, and Professor Bart Ehrman of the University of North Carolina points out that there are more than 200,000 manuscript variants of the New Testament. So those are called the recensions. Uh, in fact, he makes a very interesting observation. There are more manuscript variations of the New Testament than there are words in the English translation of the New Testament. In other words, it was repeatedly forged, it was repeatedly edited, and hence it's not a credible testimony. Number two, it's a layered text. It has many books, and all of them were written over several centuries, and then they were all put together as an anthology. And then these books all reflect the beliefs of the followers of different schools of Christianity that existed in the first 3 to 4 centuries. And all of them were put together, and that's more of an anthology creation and not a historical compilation. So because of these two reasons, New Testament is not a credible evidence. It makes a claim, and we have to look for evidence outside of the New Testament, and then we don't find anything. In other words, there is no evidence that Jesus existed. And in fact, if a historical Jesus had existed, then we would expect to see the early church fathers who are debating the pagans and the Jews to have cited all of that and then to go ahead and convert, and that we don't see. And the absence of evidence in this case is evidence of absence, and we can firmly conclude that a historical Jesus did not exist. And going back to the original quote from the Apostle Paul, if Jesus had not been crucified and if he had not been resurrected, then Christianity is false, and then all of the faith is in vain. So which makes Christianity a false religion, and believing in Christianity is a useless exercise. Before I conclude, there are a few very important historical arguments I did not talk about because I did not want this particular call to become very lengthy, but I can cover those points next week and the week after that. Professor Bart Ehrman is a very, very good scholar of Christianity, and he has done an outstanding job of debunking Christianity and New Testament in particular extensively. However, he also thinks that a historical Jesus existed, and he presents two arguments. I cover both of them in my book, What Every Hindu Should Know About Christianity, but I will cover both of those in my next talk, and I'll argue why Professor Bart Ehrman is wrong about the historicity of Jesus. And then second one is about the puzzle of Jesus family tomb. A recent archaeological discovery was made, and Professor James Tabor of University of North Carolina has written an extensive book on the subject, and it's about an alleged family tomb of Jesus. Okay, so that's a very interesting point, because if there was a family tomb of Jesus, and it automatically means that a historical Jesus existed. Is that the case? We'll talk about that in a forthcoming talk. With that, let me conclude, and I'm open to questions.
So thank you, Kalavai, for the presentation. So question and answer session will start. I will ask the first question, and then others who then raise their hand, and then I'll see that hand and I'll let that person ask the question. And you can unmute, ask your question, and then mute yourself. Okay. So my first question is that in spite of all this evidence that you have presented today and that already exists in the public domain, there is a mystique of Jesus. Like an average informed or even above average informed Hindus, they just fall for this mystique. And for instance, they introduce this fallacy, this contradiction, this paradox, saying that missionary activity and missionaries are bad, but maybe Jesus is good. How do we as a society resolve this and move forward in producing a counter to essentially what is a fraud and a global mafia? Sarabhai.
That's a wonderful question. In fact, Sitaram Goyal and before him, Chattampi Swami, both of them bring up the same question, right? So, in fact, Sitaram Goyal dwells into this topic at length, and he says, uh, whenever you criticize the missionaries, Hindus are very comfortable, but even Christians are comfortable. Even Christians will say, "Oh yeah, these missionaries did terrible things. They ran the Inquisitions. They supported slavery. They did all this abuse of Hindu gods, the pagan gods, Native American gods, everyone. But you know what? They were not following Jesus." Okay, it's a very convenient argument everyone can make, and it's very easy for Christians to accept because Christians can say, "Look, the missionaries of the past did terrible things, but they were not following Jesus. So let us go and follow Jesus. That does not threaten Christianity." That's why everybody embraces that argument. And why do Hindus feel comfortable with it? Primarily because of intellectual laziness. Okay. And very few Hindus have bothered to really study Christianity. And if you look at the last 100 years, there are only two uh, exceptionally good writings, right, or 120 years, which are critical of Christianity. One is by Chattampi Swami, the other one by Sitaram Goyal among the Hindus, right? Coinrodalst is another, so I count him as a Hindu too. So in the last 120 years or so, these are the only three people who really critiqued the teachings of Jesus and told why Jesus is an unedifying character. So, for example, if you take something like the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus calls non believers dogs and swine, right? And then Jesus also says everywhere else he's a thorough racist. And then he says he's there only for saving the Jewish people, and he calls everybody else dogs. And then the New Testament tells that Jesus will come back and then he will commit a massive genocide of non believers. And then Jesus tells everyone, abandon your family and follow me. So, in every sense of the word, Jesus is not really, mystique. He was not, a worthy character, but a myth has been created. It started with Tolstoy. Then it was propagated by the 19th century, what we call quote within quote Bengal Renaissance. I know Rajiv has done some brilliant critique of that. It's not really Renaissance or anything. It was, actually a colonial indoctrination of Bengal, but then it's called Bengal Renaissance. And then a lot of those writers, they went about glorifying Jesus. Then came Gandhi and others, and a lot of Hindu gurus. They started praising Jesus, right? And hence, most of the Hindus start with the default position that Jesus was a wonderful person, he was a mystic, he was a yogi, he was a philosopher, he was a good man, but the missionaries are doing terrible things. Okay. But I want to get into those topics in a series of lectures I will be delivering, Rajiv. Okay. I'll pick up specific teachings of Jesus, which I have done in the book, What Every Hindu Should Know About Christianity, and where I'm debunking. So to set a bit of, throw a little bit of teaser to everyone. Thomas Jefferson wrote a book. He looked at the New Testament, and then he started getting rid of all the bad verses in the Bible, and then he came up with a version of Bible. It's called the Jefferson Bible, which is only 19 pages long, 1 9. Okay, he thought everything else in the Bible was terribly bad. And then Ambrose Bierce was another American scholar, and then he came up with a even more critical approach to the Bible. He said the only problem with the Holy Book, the Bible, is that the distance between its two covers are too long. Okay, in other words, he said there is nothing worthy in between the covers of the Bible. Okay, everything should be discarded, and that's what I did in my book. What every Hindu should know about Christianity. I started with the premise of Jefferson. I ended with the premise of Ambrose Bierce. In other words, I took every teaching of Jesus which the Christians and even non-Christians think are wonderful teachings. And then I prove that every one of them is actually a hateful teaching or unworthy of being emulated or followed. So I'll cover all of those in the coming lectures. But today I wanted to focus on the historicity of Jesus because the historicity of Jesus is a precondition for the existence of Christianity, for the legitimacy of Christianity, and for any Christian missionary to go out and preach, and then for anyone to even believe in Christianity. So if a historical Jesus did not exist, then Christianity has no legitimacy. So that's something we should get Hindus to familiarize themselves with, so that when Christians come and try to preach, we'll be able to counter saying, if a historical Jesus did not exist, then every story you are telling is a fake story.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ananda Ganesh?
Hi, Kalavai.
Hello, Ananda.
I have two questions. One is the historicity of Jesus affecting other history. Okay? So that is, for example, the periods of Adi Shankara and Buddha have been reduced to come closer to the period of Jesus. And there are claims like the Bhakti movement from Tamil Nadu, the Thiruvalluvar from Tamil Nadu. These people have got influenced by Christianity. So it is because of Christianity the Bhakti movement of India has come. So maybe you can answer this question now, or you may have a separate session. So the question is, how the mythical historicity of Jesus impact the factual historicities of other cultures?
Thank you. Let me replay the question because there was a little bit of background noise. First one is, did the historicity of Jesus affect the historical aspects of other cultures? Particularly, did the historicity of Jesus influence uh, the school of Adi Shankara or the Bhakti schools that originated in the state of Tamil Nadu? Okay, so those are the questions. So first one, I don't think the historicity of Jesus influence the historicity of any other religion. It definitely did not influence the historicity of any Hindu school. Why is it? Number one, take Adi Shankara. Mm. Adi Shankara, according to the Sringeri, genealogy, existed around the 8th century. And then what is he doing? So when you look at Adi Shankara, he starts with the Vedanta Sutra, okay? And then he works through the various Upanishads, and then he follows an epistemological line of thought to establish Advaita Vedanta Darshana. Okay? And he is not uh, doing anything which is influenced by uh, Christianity and even Buddhism. For example, in the Bhashya, um, Adi Shankara refers to Buddhism only 16 times. There are only 16 verses he even refers to Buddhism. In other words, he is only referring to that for critique. Apart from that, Adi Shankara is entirely focused on a very solid Vedantic Upanishadic tradition of Hinduism that preceded him by at least a few centuries. Okay, he starts with that and then he continues on the same track. That's number one. Then number two, what kind of religion was Christianity? Christianity is not a yogic religion. Okay, it's not a religion which is based on pramana, and it is not a religion where philosophical arguments are evaluated and siddhanta established. This is something Rajiv Malhotra in his books talks at length. So in Hinduism, what you do is you always start with something as purva paksha, right? And then you evaluate the evidence, you create your arguments, and you establish siddhanta. That's what Adi Shankara does. Okay, Adi Shankara starts with the Shruti Pramana, and then he goes through all the other texts, and then he establishes his argument, and then he lays the foundation for his school of Advaita Vedanta Darshana. Okay, so Christianity, on the other hand, does not have a siddhanta. It does not have a system of pramana, and three, it does not have any philosophy. Most importantly, it was a doomsday cult. Okay, so it was expecting the end of the world. Jesus talks about the world coming to an end during his own lifetime. Okay, the lifetime of his own audience. So according to the Christian belief, it was an apocalyptic cult. The world would soon come to an end, and everyone is born a sinner. And the only way one can be saved from all of those sins is by accepting Jesus as a savior. Then they'll go to eternal heaven, and if they do not, they'll go to eternal hell. This is Christianity. On the other hand, the teachings of Adi Shankara are all about overcome ajnana, okay, and then overcome avidya, and then to acquire vidya so that you start your journey in the path of moksha. So you become a jivan mukta, and then you become self-realized. So this is the school of Adi Shankara. The two have absolutely no correlation. Second thing, the school of bhakti. The school of bhakti once again is very firmly a continuation of the Hindu traditions that are at least from 500 600 BCE. So, for example, you have references to the Bhagavatas going back to 500 600 BCE, and then even the earliest Greek writers and chroniclers who visit India, they write about the Bhagavata school. They make references to that, and you might have in the second century you might have heard of second century BCE. That's like 200 years before the alleged birth of Jesus. There were a lot of those Greeks who lived in India, and you might have heard about a person by the name Heliodorus, and then he even created some of the pillars, and they referred to the Bhakti schools. Those are the precursors to Bhakti, and then the Shaiva and the Vaishnava Bhakti schools of Hinduism, especially which originated in Tamil Nadu, are a continuation and a refinement of the pre-existing Bhakti schools. Okay, if you take Ananda for example, the Tamil text Silapadikaram, for example, was written around 170 CE. And then that book refers to, there is a beautiful song called Vadavarayai Mattaki, right? That was popularized by the great singer Emma Subbalakshmi. And then this song actually refers to Samudra Manthan. And that Samudra Manthan is an episode that comes from previous, Vaishnava Bhakti literature written in Sanskrit hundreds of years ago. So there is a continuity of the Bhakti traditions, and that's where the Tamil Bhakti traditions also derive their inspirations from. Number one. Number two, there is no Bhakti in Christianity. Christianity is a religion of fear mongering. If you accept Jesus, you'll go to heaven or you go to hell. There is no such thing called, the various bhava that is very essential for Bhakti. None of those exist in Christianity. Third one, there was no Christianity in India at least until the 9th or 10th century CE. Okay, that's when the first Christians start coming to India. When you look at the earliest inscriptions, the copper plate inscriptions, those are all about the Christians who have come to India as traders, and they all have Iranian names. That tells us that they probably originated from in and around Iran, and they came to India as traders, and they settled down. And only after that, a settlement grows in India, and by the time of Marco Polo in the 12th, 13th centuries, that's when you have the first Christian settlements, native Indian Christian settlements coming up in India. So if there was no Christianity, and if there was no Christian influence for the first millennium, then there is, by which time the philosophy of Adi Shankara, his schools, and the Bhakti schools have all come into existence and had been firmly established, then Christianity could not have influenced any of the Hindu traditions in any sense.
Okay, thank you. Shobha Swami is next.
Raj, I have one more question. May I ask?
Yeah.
This is Ananda.
Quickly, please.
Thanks for the detailed answer, Kalavi. So the second question is, the historicity of Jesus is spread, but the history of Christianity is not at all spread and not at all told, not at all taught anywhere. So how Hindus could learn about Goa Inquisition, which is the second longest Inquisition in the world, and such other historicity of Christianity?
That's a very good question. Let me just play it back. While the historicity of Jesus can be extremely sketchy, and he may not have existed as a historical person, the horrendous crimes and the criminal history of the Christian church is a reality. And one of them is the Inquisition. The Christian church carried out repeatedly, including in Goa, which was a terrible inquisition. People are burned alive on boats, and those were the Hindu people. So Hindus are forcibly converted, and then even after converting, they were suspected of not completely abandoning Hinduism, and they were burnt alive and persecuted. And Xavier, whom Christians call saint, he asked for the Inquisition, and subsequently during the Inquisition, the Hindu temples were razed in Goa, and all the terrible things happened. So Ananda's question is, how can Hindus know about this terrible history of Christianity? Uh, First, there are a few books that have been written that are really good books, and Shefali has also delivered some excellent speeches on that subject, and you can find all of that in YouTube, and you should listen to that. So, and I think every Hindu should listen to those. And uh, what we find here is a continuing pattern, Ananda. Okay, so Christianity, so the Hindus of Goa were not the first non-Christians to be persecuted by the Christian church. They were one of the last. From the very beginning, Christians went about persecuting everybody else, okay, who were not Christians. That's what Jesus says. In the Bible, Jesus teaches, go and try to convert, but if somebody doesn't convert, curse them, shake the dust off your feet, curse them, and move on. So here the curse means you'll be doomed. You'll go to hell. And the Bible repeatedly teaches that Jesus is the only way, and he is the only way to salvation. And if you are not salvaged, then you will go to hell. And it talks about the second coming of Jesus, and during his second coming, Jesus will commit a terrible genocide on earth, and all the non-believers will be killed. And first they'll be tortured on earth for five months, then they'll be slaughtered, and then they will be put on a hellbound cargo post-mortem, and then they'll be persecuted and tortured in hell for eternity. So this is what the Bible teaches. So, and the Christians believed the Bible is a divine revelation, and they thought that Jesus is Son of God, is divine, and hence everything he told was true to them. That's why the Christians were behaving the way they did. They went about persecuting the pagans. They destroyed the pagan temples. They destroyed the pagan libraries. They uh, uh, suppressed their religions. They persecuted the Jewish people. The Holocaust of the Jews was a continuation of what the Christians did, and it came to a culmination under the Third Reich of Adolf Hitler. And then the Native American, and then the Gypsies or the Roma people or Hindus who went from India to Europe, they were taken as slaves, and then they were sold into slavery, and then they were persecuted by the Christian church. So there was a continuity. So the how do so back to your question, how do Hindus familiarize themselves with this history? One, by reading, and number two, all of us have a role to play, which is to create easy to understand video lectures so that all the Hindus can understand that. That's number one. Then number two is to understand why Christians did all those terrible deeds. Okay, the answer for that question is, the physicist, the Nobel Prize winning physicist Steven Weinberg once said, good people do good things, bad people do evil things, but for a good person to do something evil, that takes religion. Okay, so if that is the case, um, it's not that Christians were genetically or inherently evil people, but then they were following an evil religion. They are following the evil teachings of Jesus. And if Jesus had already said that non-believers are equivalent to dogs, swine, and they are fit to be cursed, they are fit to be persecuted, and eventually to be slaughtered, and then tortured in hell for eternity, then it naturally follows that Christians are doing a sacred religious duty by implementing something like the Inquisition. Okay, so the most important thing is to understand that Christians did all those terrible things because of the evil teachings of Jesus, and that's something we should educate everyone. There is no substitute to getting educated, and unfortunately, some of the Hindu gurus, some of the Hindu political leaders have all gone about praising Jesus, and the first part of that is helping Hindus to unlearn that fake history and then, uh, you know, uh, to teach the real history and the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah, Shobha Swami is next.
My question may be already been answered, but I'll just go ahead and ask this. How can this and your entire book be used among Hindu dharmikas, especially for the next generations? And what is the significance and relevance of all this for our next generation Hindus?
Thank you very much. I'll repeat the question because it was not very audible. So Shobhaji asked, how can we get uh, all the arguments we have written in the book to reach a broader Hindu audience, and what is its significance for the next generation? Kindly go on mute if you're not speaking. Yeah. Somebody is speaking. Please mute yourself.
Yeah, everybody mute yourself. Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you. So the first one, how do we get the message of the book to everyone? So the one is simplification, right? I think that's a very important one. The book is right now written. I wrote it in a way so that it is giving all the critical facts and all the arguments and very well referenced, etc. But that's also not always easily readable. I tried to make it as readable as I could, but then a serious book is not always readable. So the first thing is to create a version of the book which is easy for everyone to follow. Okay, and then uh, uh, keep it less academic, but turn it into a way. I'm a big fan of Chandamama, right? Chandamama used to get a lot of these stories out, but in a very simplified version. That's number one. And second one, what is the second thing to do is to uh, render it in Indian languages, but also in all media formats, including in YouTube videos and other things, because more people are likely to listen to a video or an audio lecture than to sit down and read a 300-page book. So that's the second thing which we should do. And the third one to do is to translate that into local languages. Okay, because when you write in English, it's going to reach only a small number of Hindus. Okay, mostly well-educated English-speaking Hindus, but they are a small, minuscule minority among Hindus. So it's not only my book, but also the books of Chattambi Swamigal. It's the books of Koyenradel, Sitaram Goyal, and a lot of other scholars. We should translate into these formats and languages, and that's an effort we should do. And the second question is, what is the significance for future generation of Hindus? So in my book, I make a very decisive argument that Hinduism and Christianity cannot coexist. Okay, only one of them will survive. If Christianity wins, then it's curtains down for Hinduism. You can look at places like Nagaland, right, in India. So once Christianity went there, until 1950s, 1960s, there was no Christianity in Nagaland. It was a very insignificant religion. Then by 1970, the conversion starts on a big scale, and in a matter of few decades, Nagaland is fully Christianized and there is no Hinduism left. Okay, and the Hindus like the Riang Hindus and others have been persecuted and thrown out. The same thing happened in South Korea. So if Christianity prevails, then it's curtains down. It's curtains down for Hinduism. So the significance is you don't have a choice here. Okay, either you accept that if we coexist, eventually we lose Hinduism, like all the other religions that were destroyed by Christianity, or we learn everything about Christianity and then we take the fight to Christians and then we work on eradicating Christianity and saving Christians from Jesus. That's the significance for future Hindus. Our mission should be, we should save Christians from Jesus by critiquing, attacking, ridiculing, and eventually eradicating the religion of Christianity.
Okay, wonderful. Jijit is next. Jijit? Yeah.
Jijit, you're on mute.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So thanks for this wonderful talk. So one of my question is like, if Jesus is a myth, then is it possible for having a chronological understanding of when all these lies which is associated with this falsehood called Jesus emerged? So some of them which are having high consequence to India is Jesus traveling to Kashmir and living there. And then there is a lie about the St. Thomas coming to Mylapore and killing Brahmin, one Brahmin there. And then there is also the associated lies about that Magdalena Mariam, that is wife of Jesus. So there is a lot of other falsehoods associated with. And is there any historical analysis done when each of these falsehood has arisen, and is it possible to disseminate this information so that the people of India can be somewhat saved or inoculated with all this from these lies? But and one another question is, maybe it's a very specific thing. Whether I have recently heard about Vedavir Aryaji's chronological revisions, and he is also talking about the possibility of pushing, correcting the chronological order of the Christianity, or basically he's talking about the Easter celebrations by 400 years. So one thing I want to know is that if you push everything to 400 years back, there is any possibility of somebody talking about Jesus, which now we can refute at somewhere around 5 BC to 100 AD? If these things get pushed, if there is any kind of reference coming, or is it blank at that point also?
No, thank
Anyway,
you. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for the questions. Two questions. Number one, the first question I'll just paraphrase for everyone. First question is there a way we can uh, debunk, or we can point out when all these historical myths about Jesus were invented? Okay, so yes, it's absolutely possible to do, not only about Jesus, but all the way Jesus to the coming of the alleged visit of St. Thomas to India and all of these things, right? So some of that has been already done. Okay, so there is a school of scholars called the mythicists, like Richard Carrier and a lot of others have done that work really well. Okay, Robert Price and others have done an outstanding work, and the challenge is most of that work today is in a very, what I would call, abstruse scholarly format. Okay, and getting it into a more easily readable format is the first thing, right? And but it is absolutely doable. In my book, that's the attempt I have made. But there is need for simplification. That's absolutely yes. And number two, some of that has been done, like in the case of St. Thomas allegedly coming to India. Ishwar Charan has done a really good work debunking that, and it was a Portuguese myth that was invented very recently in the last 2-3 centuries. But all of that can be definitely done, and it is essential to do that. Okay, so and then your second question, sorry, I lost track of that.
yeah, the lies, one is St. Thomas, another one is the Kashmir, Jesus
Oh, the
in
Kashmir
Kashmir.
one. Got it. Okay. So there is a myth. It was started by this Russian charlatan. His name is Notovich. Okay. It was a 19th century fraud. He started claiming that Jesus traveled. He was well. The story runs somewhat like this, right? Jesus was crucified, but he did not die in the crucifixion, and then he traveled to India, and then where he lived until the age of 80, and his tomb is in Kashmir. And in the variants of this, which says that he also spent some time in Tibet and other places where he learned. So all of these are outright forgeries, invented in the 19th century. A lot of them have been already debunked, and Coinradist has done that in many places. And but I don't think there is a single comprehensive work that has been written, because I think this is a very important one to debunk, because a lot of Hindus think that Jesus was a yogi, and they are easily enamored by this kind of a nonsense, right? Jesus came to Dwaraka, he came to Puri Jagannath, he came to Kashmir, and all these kind of really silly stories, they get carried on. It's very easy to debunk, and it has to be done. I don't think a single comprehensive book has been written for doing that, but it's worth writing it. That's number one. And then the second question you asked was about some of things, like Easter, right? Easter was about, there was this pagan goddess, Eostra, and Easter was celebrated centuries before Christianity, right? Like 500, 600, 700 years before Christianity came into existence. And Christianity started celebrating Easter only from around 325 CE or so, which means at least for 800-900 years before that, it had been observed as a pagan religion, a pagan festival, and the same is the case for even Christmas. So Christmas was, called originally Dies Natalis Invicti. It was the birth of the unconquered sun, right? It was solar god, and it was celebrated for a long time, and only around 340-50 CE, it starts becoming a Christian festival. Uh, there are a lot of scholarly works that have been written to highlight that, but it has to be brought to the popular, for popular consumption.
Yeah, Mohini, you're next. Unmute yourself. Mohini?
I think Mohini is still muted.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Can you hear me,
Yes, yes, we,
Kalavaiji?
yes, we
Yes,
can.
Kalavaiji, I must say that you're a total hero, and I'm in awe of you. And I just want to do my pronounce to you. I was first generation born and brought up in England, and I had the most horrific experience growing up at Christian boarding schools where church was imposed on us, and also Christian colonial dogma. And I just wanted to ask you about this superstructure that the West has created, where Christianity is very much a tool, a column of colonialism, racism, and white supremacy, or Judeo-Christian supremacy. I have had these struggles and encounters all my life growing up as first generation Hindu. Unfortunately, my parents were not aware of all these political, social, political, geopolitical issues, and I struggled with so much unhappiness and misery. And I think through all those struggles now, I've really tried to find myself in my dharma. And even though I don't speak any Hindi, or I'm not even married to an Indian, I'm so deeply rooted and connected to dharma and the struggle to survive. And I just want to know, when you were saying that a lot of Hindus are intellectually lazy, I think that you should also reinforce a much more predominant point, is that Hindus are subverted, mentally subverted. A lot of them don't have the courage to try and struggle against racist ideologies, racist mistreatment, or subjugation, mental slavery, what have you, a subjugated mind. They don't want to fight against it. They don't want to resist it. They just want to become part of what they think is the dominant majority. I know many Hindus who proudly declare that they've served Mother Teresa, Sai Baba devotees, and I've seen, Sri Sri devotees really go, really criticize me if I'm criticizing militant fascist Islam. And it's horrible, when you're trying to defend what is just and true, and what your soul where your soul belongs, and your own people are attacking you because of their own complexes, racial, we've been racialized, subjugated, and they just have inferiority complexes. And instead of, standing, sort of standing up for themselves and trying to elevate themselves and master the confusion, and masterfully navigate themselves through all these horrible constructs that the West has imposed on us, they just surrender, So and I was also going to mention about the Northeast. There was an anthropologist, and he was a fanatical missionary called Verrier. Do you know who I'm talking about? His name, I was just looking up his name. Elwin Verrier?
No, I am not familiar with his name.
Yeah, he also had a very mischievous hand in Christianizing the Northeast,
Yeah, let Kalavaiji answer that question, okay?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead. Very.
Yeah. First of all, Mohini-ji, thank you very much for the very kind words. And then you brought up a lot of very important points. So let me start with one very important point you made, right? It's not only, you mentioned about your own family, that people, your family, parents and others may not have been fully aware of Hinduism. And so when we grow up in the West, we are exposed to Christianity, and there is a superstructure which the Christians in the West have created. So I want to start with something very interesting here, right, while answering this question. First one, it is not just intellectual laziness, which, even though I mentioned that it is not just intellectual laziness that prevents Hindus from understanding and Christianity for what it is, right? And I think some of it is also driven by something genuinely noble in Hindus. And I want to start with citing a beautiful song that was written by Guru Arjun Dev, right? So, he was a Sikh guru, but then today Sikhi could be seen as a separate religion, but then when it was founded, it was not. It was part and parcel of Hinduism. And then Guru Arjun Dev wrote a beautiful song, Koi bole Ram Ram, some say Ram Ram, Koi Huda hai, some say Huda. Huda is a, the Persian Iranian word that means God, right? Koi seve goseya, some serve uh, the saints, and then koi Allah hai, okay, and some serve Allah, okay. So koi bole Ram Ram, koi Huda ye, koi seve goseya, koi Allah ye, okay. So the bottom line is, um, Guru Arjun Dev was looking at all religions as having something noble, right? As something spiritual, as something divine. And it is not a very unique thought that Guru Arjun Dev invents. It's something very foundational to Hinduism. That's why we have different schools of philosophies. These are not exclusivist. And we don't say, if you do not follow my school of philosophy, you'll go to hell. And hence the family traditions and everything is very critical. So typically you'll find a Hindu from one part of India may marry a Hindu from another part, but then there is no such thing called conversion. They end up creating the two coming together and then they create a tradition, right? So at a very core, Hindus have a history of having seen something dharmic and something spiritual, something divine in every religious path. And they simply made an assumption this should be true of Christianity and Islam too. That was an incorrect assumption. However, uh, the reason why Hindus made that assumption was because of something noble about Hindu tradition, where we don't say, I only have the truth and except me, everyone else is false. We don't have that kind of mindset. Okay, we are ready to look for something divine and accept something divine in other traditions and other religions, and that's the reason why we have it, right? So that's one of the reasons, besides intellectual laziness, why we have not critically examined Christianity and other religions, because our philosophy is, look, my religion is good enough for me and so is yours for you, okay. But that may not really apply to Christianity or Islam, and we should make course correction there, and we should ruthlessly critique. And for that also we have solid uh, tradition in Hinduism. If you take someone like Jayanta Bhatta, he wrote Nyaya Manjari. He was a great Kashmiri Shaiva, Nyaya philosopher. And then he has shown that every religion, every religious belief should be critically examined. And if it is found to be harmful, then it should be ridiculed or even suppressed. Okay, so that's the school of thought he has brought out, and that's also part and parcel of our Hindu tradition. And while there is enough place for us to be noble, there is also enough need for us to be ruthlessly critical and follow the tradition of someone like Jayanta Bhatta. So now, coming to your question on how the West has used Christianity to create a superstructure to not only spread the religion but also to colonize. That's absolutely true. Okay, so the best way to understand that is to go back to the 2008 American presidential elections. So it was Barack Obama versus John McCain, and then they were both debating each other at the Saddleback Church in Los Angeles. So one of the questions was, how did or how does Jesus influence you in your life? Okay, Barack Obama gave a simple answer. He said, "Look, every time I walk, I know that Jesus is walking beside me." Okay, and then John McCain came and gave an answer. He said, "I was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. Okay, and I was in the prison cell, and every day in the morning, one of the prison guards, a Vietnamese guy, he will come, he will stand, he will not speak a single word to me, but with his foot, he will draw a cross on the sand. Then he will erase it and he'll walk away." That was his message to me, from one Christian to another. It was a message of solidarity. And all the Christians sitting in that church, Saddleback Church, applauded like anything. That was, I think, the answer which got the most applause. But what is the message here? America invaded Vietnam. America napalmed through Agent Orange, and it killed 4.5 million Vietnamese. It was a terrible carnage. It was a genocide. Okay, a country was totally destroyed by the Americans. And here, John McCain says, one of the prison guards, a Vietnamese person, as a Vietnamese prison guard, his responsibility is to the Vietnamese people, especially the Vietnamese Buddhists who had been persecuted and who had been victims of a massive genocide. Yet this prison guard, because he's a convert to Christianity, starts identifying himself with the West, even with the Americans who were the conquerors. And this is exactly what happened. everywhere Christianity colonized. In Vietnam, as soon as the Vietnamese section of Vietnamese are converted to Catholicism, they started cracking down on local Buddhism, and they started imposing and facilitating the Western colonial agenda. And the same happened in India. The Christian church, as soon as Christians are converted, the Christian church started indoctrinating Indians about why the British rule was beneficial, even though the British rule killed at least 100 million Indians. And this has been true everywhere, whether you go to Africa, whether you go to South America, everywhere, the native traditions are destroyed. And Christianity is an enabler for the West. It has been an enabler for the West to colonize the rest of the world by other means, because it's much easier to convert somebody to Christianity, which is perceived as the religion of the West, and then to control the people, than to send your armies and put boots on the ground and to suppress the people.
Yeah, thank you. Satish is next.
Pranam, Namaskar, Rajiv ji, thank you for the invitation, and Venkat ji, it's nice to connect with you again. Can you hear me? Is this coming through okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for the enlightening talk. As you know, I'm here in the UK, and here in the UK we have a situation where in one Sunday morning attendance at Christian churches, the figure has dropped to 750,000 attendance. In a population of maybe less than 70 million, we're down to a minuscule attendance in Christian churches from the domestic population. Accepting what you have said, that the existence of Jesus is a falsehood, and any academic scrutiny of it, which is independent, will come to the same conclusion. Accepting also what we all know, that Christianity has been a force for evil in human affairs, as your book clearly identifies the psychosis behind it, and books by people like Nixie, The Darkening Age, is now also reinforcing everything that we have been saying. We have got a fantastic opportunity. On the one hand, we have unbelievable quality in terms of our offering in the space of adhyatmic progress and evolution. On the other hand, we have a competitor who is determined to be a theocratic monopoly, who have a fraudulent product, who have a devastating history. This is an incredible opportunity for people from our tradition to step forward. Now, accepting everything that we know about the colonial past and the mimetic virus which Christianity is, we have a place we would like to see, and that is that a dharmic understanding being prevalent throughout all of humanity. If that's the project goal, we understand where we are, we understand the battlefield and the drivers. What seems to me to be the next step is the evolution of a specific project strategy which can take us from where we are to where we know humanity would be better served. How does that strategy emerge from where we are?
Thanks a lot, Satish. That's a really good question. And first of all, it's a pleasure to connect with you again, and it's a privilege to discuss with you. And for those who are not familiar with Satish ji, he is a wonderful speaker. The way he articulates his thoughts, and it's my wish one day I want to learn to speak at least 5% of how you speak, Satish ji. Okay, so, and one of the best speeches, there is a panel on BBC. I think it was BBC, right? So where Satish ji is invited, and there are only a few questions, and he's given only a few seconds in the entire conversation, right? And this I think happened in 2017, I think. And then so Satish ji, and the very first conversation starts with the moderator, who comes across as sympathetic to Hinduism, by the way, but he still throws a googly, and he tries to put Satish ji on a defensive by invoking caste, and the way Satish ji gives the response is beautiful. Okay, and then how he gets the topic to shift to how mysticism is the path of a religion, the way we Hindus see that, and most of the Eastern religions we see that, and then he changes the conversation, right? So that is, it's a very beautiful way of articulating. There are a lot of times you get a few seconds to get your thoughts across, and Satish ji does a wonderful job of that. So now to your specific question, Satish ji. First one is, the attendance of Christians is dropping. Uh, I would say in some clusters, right? So Anglican Church is slightly or relatively more refined compared to a lot of other schools like Catholicism or Protestant or evangelical Christianities in general, right? So uh, while it is true that the attendance rates in some of these churches like the Anglican Church, Episcopalian Church, etc., are dropping, we should still be cautious about other facts. So, for example, my data is a little bit dated. It's about 6-7 years old. But at that time, in South Korea alone, there were 40,000 Episcopalian missionaries operating. Okay, so that means even though the Episcopal Church has been losing its attendance in the West, this church has been sending a lot of missionaries to Eastern countries. 40,000 Episcopal missionaries. Okay, both native Koreans and Westerners converting in Korea. Okay, so this mischief, all of these churches play even when their attendance is dropping. So back to Mohini ji's point, while the people may be losing faith, or at least the educated people may be losing the faith, they have created a superstructure that can continue to propel itself for some more time. Okay, and it can do a lot of damage to us. That's number one. Then number two, there are other churches like especially the evangelical varieties that are actually spreading very fast. Okay, and because they work on a very simple premise of faith healing. Okay, they don't make heavy investment in infrastructure. They target a moment of weakness everyone might have, and then they use faith healing as one mechanism. Second, they pump money into the venture, and then people are paid to convert, and then they are kept on a tight leash, and then they expand. So those churches are expanding. While that's not happening in places like UK or Western Europe in general, that's happening quite a lot in third world countries, including in India. So that's something we should be very watchful of. While one strand of Christianity is dying, the other ones are picking up. Okay, then back to your question on Adhyatma, and then how um, we are at a junction point from where we can segue into a uh, into a new strategy, right? A new strategic way of evolution. I think here is the big difference, right? So Hinduism, and for that reason, many of the Eastern religions, but I'm going to talk only about Hinduism here. Hinduism is something you can live and you can experience. Okay, to take an example, you go and practice yoga or you do pranayama. It's something you can really experience. Or those who are familiar with bhakti traditions, bhakti tradition is not just about reciting bhakti poetry and other things. Those were part and parcel of our lives. So, for example, when I grew up, my mom was always reciting a lot of the bhakti poetry as she was cooking, right? It was part and parcel of your life. That's something you can live. And so something like yoga or something like pranayama, these things people can practice. So in other words, you are not just memorizing something from a book, and then you are not just becoming part of a congregation, but you are practicing things in Hinduism which are something can experience here and now, and which are beneficial to you. I think what we should do is think of a way where we can get this out, okay, to a broader audience, not just Indians, not just those who are born Hindus, but also to Westerners, though, so they can start relating to these things. I think while this was done very effectively by someone like BKS Iyengar and others in the 1960s, I think we are not doing this as effectively today, right? That's number one. And then number two is uh, even things like Christianity, everything we know, it's an evil religion. We know that Jesus did not exist, and the Jesus of the New Testament, a mythical figure, taught a lot of terrible things. This knowledge has not gone out to the public, and once again, I think we are not leveraging our core strength, right? Our core strength is how we told stories. That's why we have the Mahabharata, we have the Ramayana, we have even in modern times we have all this Chandamama and all of these texts, and we are not creating those things. So in other words, we are not creating a systemic apparatus to educate the younger generation. Okay, we are leaving them to the mercy of the secular brigade, who are just the front end for the Christians. And then the second, we are just leaving it to the Christian missions to inject and infect their minds with Christian worldview. And then we are not producing enough which our children can pick up and do that. So, to simple example, right? I would say about 50-60% of the attendees here would be software experts, right? And hell, and still we have not even created anything, which is a powerful 3D, animation of a lot of the Hindu stories, or even a critique of other religions, right? So, for example, a revision of Christianity, we can do very effectively through such videos, but we are not doing it. So I think we are not leveraging our strength. That's something we should do to create something systemic, so that A, we can critique Christianity and make our younger children understand that easily, and B, all the powerful, effective, and beneficial practice of Hinduism, uh, we can get them to reach this younger generation. I think that those are the two things we should be doing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Satishji. Please finish up.
Thank you very much, Venkati, and thank you for the compliments. That's really appreciated. I think you've really hit the nail on the head there with regard to producing content, because the BBC interview that you have referred to ultimately was a piece of content. And it wasn't until after the interview and the panel discussion had finished, and I saw the comments on the Facebook and Twitter and things like that, that I realized what an impact and what a thirst our straightforward, commonsensical teachings provide. There is a huge demand for it, and as you say, he who tells the stories rules the world. You're absolutely spot on. Production of content is really the key for the future. Your book is a brilliant contribution to the production of content, and I'm looking forward to playing with some of the content there and putting it into a multimedia environment. Rajivji, once again, thank you so much for hosting this and bringing everyone together. And Venkati, I look forward to a conversation one-to-one sometime as to how we can create a bit more mischief in this space. I think there is a great opportunity for us.
Absolutely, Satish ji.
Thank you.
Absolutely. See, and one more thing I will just add to that, right? Before Nataraja ji asks the next question. So, I know my strengths and my weaknesses, right? I'm a good analyst, right? I can analyze, I can bring a lot of data points together and write, right? So, but I'm a terrible speaker. Okay, so just if you had to contrast last minute or two, the way Satish ji articulates his thoughts, he formulates the arguments and he gets it out. Okay, I cannot even come to within 1% of what he is doing, no matter how hard I try, right? So I think the most important thing is a lot of times you'll find many folks would be able to tell this story very effectively. I think that's one important thing we should invest in. There are people who are creating the material, and then there are people who are creating content that can be delivered in a certain style to the audience, right? Based on the audience. So, and that audience, the way we deliver it will vary by the demographics, age, and all of these things, but that's something we should definitely do.
Yeah, Nataraji.
Yeah, namaste Kalveji, namaste Rajivji. Thank you for hosting this. If I understand correctly, the reason why this book was written and why we are having this discussion, one is to at least understand whether he existed or not academically, right? Probably the next step would be to use this information in terms of fighting Christianity itself, especially being a Hindu in India, right? Now, most of the conversions that are happening in India are not by guys who understand or who don't understand Christianity, but rather because they developed some sort of hatred towards the Sanatana framework itself, right? And then this conversion and then continuing with this group gives them some sort of identity, and then the political power that comes with it. Correct. So if that were the case, me understanding or anybody understanding whether Christianity has any sense to it or not, or whether there's any sense to Jesus' existence or what he taught, right? Somebody like me would not be able to have a chat with them or even sit with them and talk to them and say that, what, this is all hocus pocus and don't believe in all this. They are more worried about, they getting freebies, they getting some sort of recognition or some sort of identification among themselves, and then forming a group. So the truth behind Jesus' existence does not matter with what is actually happening there. In that case, what steps should we take besides understanding the hocus pocus nature of his existence? Besides that, right? Yeah. What else should be done?
That's a great question, right? So the first thing is, it is not uh, one. Responding to Christianity cannot be a one-trick pony, right? We cannot have just one approach and say this is going to work and everything else is not going to work. So let me start with why understanding the truth about Jesus and understanding uh, the true nature of Christianity and how evil it is important, right? So when you criticize Christianity, even before, or when you criticize Jesus, even before Christians respond, you will find a section of Christianized Hindus, right? These are the Hindus, the namesake, and they still remain Hindus on paper, but they have been so westernized and so Christianized in their way of thinking. They'll be the first persons to jump on you and attack you. Okay, so uh, and these people are educated, right? And they may not be knowledgeable, but they are educated. Okay, so they will come back and say, "Oh, Jesus was a great man," and then you are being a bigot. Okay, so now. The first responders, if you don't take care of them, they are going to set the tone of the narrative. So even to respond to them, you need to be able to say first, look, Jesus did not exist, and then whatever you claim he was a good man, but then he's calling others dogs, and he's going to come and commit a genocide. The good people commit genocides. Okay, that's number one. Then second, you are absolutely right. When they go and convert, what they are doing is they are doing two things. I don't know it's so much of hatred towards Sanatana Dharma for the converts. It's for the missionaries, yes. Missionaries hate Sanatana Dharma, right? But the converts are mostly ignorant people. The way it works is, they first go, they look for a moment of weakness. Somebody is looking for a job, or somebody is bereaving because somebody in the family died. And then they go for those, and then Christianity deploys a congregation to tag on to this person, right? And then they provide what they call, the community support. And then this person now becomes indebted to those who provided support to him or her in times of need. Then there is money involved, right? They pay the person to convert. So these factors are very important. But now, once a person falls into the trap, it's very hard to get that person out. Okay, then facts, logic, nothing will work in that case. Okay, they will say, look, I was I was in need, and in time of my need, these people were helpful, so I'm indebted. Now, but the fight is not with this potential convert. This potential convert is a victim, right? Or our fight is with the Christian missionaries. And then let's say a missionary walks into the village, okay, and he's trying to convert. Then today in Tamil Nadu, a lot of people are doing that. Okay, so I'm working with another group, and then there are a lot of people in Tamil Nadu who are doing that in small villages. When Christian missionaries come in, they straight away challenge them. Okay, sometimes it can get risky, sometimes it can be very fact, and but including questions like a simple fact. Okay, you are coming, and there is, for example, in the book of Matthew, and also Mark, Jesus says, if you are a believer, you can drink poison and you will not die. And all these things he says, right? You can hold a snake in your hand and you will not die. So all you need to do is to believe in Jesus and you should be baptized. So some of the tricks people are playing is, when missionaries walk in, do you believe in Jesus? The answer is yes. Okay, go get a snake or give them a bottle of poison, drink it. Okay, prove your belief. So now the key is how we are able to take our critique of Christianity and all the facts we know, and how we are condense that into a storyline that our counter missionaries, that's the word I would use, those who are countering the missionaries, can use on the ground and reduce Christianity to a laughing stock. Our objective should be to reduce Christianity, the Bible, and Jesus to a laughing stock and ridicule them. So every time missionaries walk in, there will be others presenting the counter, and it works. And how do we know it works? Look at the Varnashrama or the Jati system, right? And which is mistakenly called caste, which is actually a Portuguese word, but then called casta. But the moment somebody invokes the word caste, most of the Hindus will say, will go into a denial. They'll say, oh no, there is no, it's no longer prevalent in India, or they'll be apologetic and all of these things, right? Why did that happen? What happened was Christian missionaries did a very good job of mischaracterizing the Jati and Varna systems. Okay, and then they created a narrative, okay, that uh, equated caste with inequities. Okay, and then the moment you mention caste, the thought that comes to everyone's mind is inequity. Okay, and hence people get defensive about that. So we have to do exactly the same thing. We don't have to present all the arguments about origin and everyone, but in some form or the other, we have to create a narrative. So when people say, hey, if Jesus himself, when missionaries walk in and the villagers start countering, if Jesus himself did not exist, then your entire religion is a lie. Okay, so where is the proof? Okay, show me the proof. Okay, so then the missionaries will be now put on the defensive. Now they have to show the proof. Okay, so now this is not to be directed at the potential convert. Okay, it is to be directed in the public space at the missionaries. That's where it is really effective.
Okay, Shivji.
Namaskar to everyone. I am from Los Angeles, California currently, and I thank so much for this enlightened talk. Very wonderful. I had two quick questions. Number one question is very quick. I think, have you come across recently by the Robert Price book, Deciphering the Gospel, 2015? Have you a take on it?
Yes, I'm very familiar with the writings of Professor Robert Price, and I have also cited that in my book and in a few other articles of mine. And I'll make a separate, lecture on that, so that I can go into the set the context. I can come in, because I think to answer that question, what I need to do is to, in fact, Professor Robert Price, for the benefit of everyone, did a wonderful thing by coining the word crucifixion. Okay. CRUCI hyphen FICTION, right? It's a, so, and then he also talked about, in his series of books, he also talked about the ever shrinking Son of Man, right? So how, when the mythicist yardstick is applied, and when Jesus is critically examined, he shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. Okay, so yes, I'm very familiar with all of those writings and researches. Some of that I have cited in the book and my essays. And what I will do is I'll make a separate, lecture on that.
Okay, Nageshwara is next. Please unmute yourself. Nageshwara ji.
Hey, sorry. Nageshwara here. So I heard all the how to fight. That's wonderful suggestions coming from Venkatji. But how do we also make ourselves strong? Like bring our understanding our own civilization, traditions, history, and all these things. I think that's really done nothing. I feel, especially post-independence. Especially one of them is spreading Sanskrit as an unifying language across all the states, which gives more, or it becomes a tool to understand our scriptures easy way, so that it would be easy to really fight the other narratives.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very good question. I think there are two things, right? One is spreading Sanskrit, yoga, and all of these things, right? And our own different darshanas, knowledge of different darshanas among the Hindus, and educating them. That's one initiative. And the other initiative is how do we empower ourselves to fight the Christian missionaries? The two have to go hand in hand. Okay, the two, one is not a substitute for the other. Okay, because let's say learning any darshana. Okay, is going to take you several years, right? You will start understanding something theoretically after 1 or 2 years of reading, and then you have to go through sadhana for several years to become anywhere good at it, and then for you to get insights out of that, it's going to take several years. So that means that process is going to be like a one filter on top of the other on top of the other. If 100 people start, by the time 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years go by, you'll be left with 4 people who are really knowledgeable, right? But still, that's a very important exercise because that's how we built our pathshalas, that's how we built our gatikas, and that's how we created all of these great texts and traditions and philosophies within Hinduism. That has to absolutely happen on one hand, okay? But a parallel exercise is to understand what is it that empowers the Christians? It's the congregation, okay? Because you walk into a church, even a small church is going to have a few thousand people, okay, attending every Sunday, okay? And then they are all coming at the same time, and then they are listening to the, the same, the priest or pastor, and then they are all made to think alike. And there is, in evolutionary biology, there is something called conformance bias. We all have this tendency to conform, right? And then when 100 people agree with something, the 101st person is going to most likely agree with that. Okay, so it's hard to be the odd person out. Okay, so one thing we need to do is we need to understand is this is where Hinduism doesn't have a lot of strengths. Okay, so there are some Hindu. Well, let me put it differently. Okay, so Hinduism doesn't have a lot of congregations. There are some Hindu traditions. For example, the different schools of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, or the Hare Krishnas, or Art of Living, and others. They have some sort of congregation. Okay, but even there, you are not, a devotee aligned with a particular temple, right? You may go to a particular temple and you may follow a particular guru, etc. But then you are not necessarily a member of a temple, and then you are not on a roster and none of those things, right? So whereas in Christianity, you are a member of a church and you are tightly controlled from the beginning to the end. So we should know this is both our strength and weakness, because it's our strength because this is what allows your spiritual progress. Okay, if you are a member of a temple or a church, and then that's all you are attending, and then you are conforming to the rest of the congregation, you are not going to evolve spiritually. At some stage, the spiritual progress is like learning music. Okay, there can be a class of 10 people, but if there is one person who is playing sitar very well, then the teacher will say, you know what, I'm going to teach you something different because you are progressing very differently. Okay, so the spiritual progress at some level is, like Satish ji and Rajiv mentioned, is it's also very adhyatmic in nature. Okay, so it's very personal, and hence not having a congregation is a good thing. Okay, at the same time, in the temporal world, the politicians are going to listen to the congregation, because if there are 5,000 people in a church, that's 5,000 votes to the politician, and hence the politician will go after and appease them. So we have to seriously think in terms of uh, using law, okay, to declare congregational worship illegal. We should focus on nationalizing the Christian churches, okay, taking over their property, because they are everything the Christian church has in India is ill-gotten wealth, right? Those are all wealth stolen from the Hindus by the British and bestowed upon the church. So we should work on taking it over legally. Okay. For example, the temples are run by the government, and then we should start mooting the idea of how we enact laws. That's what the Christians in the West do it very well, especially in the US. They do it very well. They have an agenda. They come up with a set of items they want to legislate on, and then they enforce it. And we need to start thinking in that direction. So we have to start with the basic understanding that Christianity is evil, Jesus is evil, and Hinduism and Christianity cannot coexist. We should understand their strength. Their major strength is their congregation, and we should, like the Mahabharata says, when you want to take on the enemy, you take away his most powerful weapon. Okay, that's why when Yudhishthira is sent by Krishna, he goes and tells Dronacharya, Ashwatthama Hatha Kunjaraha. Okay, so because the biggest strength on that day, in the early phase of the Kurukshetra Yuddha, was the strength of Dronacharya. Okay, as a commander, he was decimating the Pandava army. Okay, so you had to get rid of him. So you use one weapon that takes away all his strengths, and that was a lie Yudhishthira was asked to tell. So we should know the weapons the enemy possesses. In the case of Christians, the congregation, and then we should think of the counters we should evolve to completely weaken that or destroy that. So that it's a a double pronged strategy that we should follow.
Thank you, Venkatji. I want to ask further question on that. I was thinking to fight, or we should fight for releasing the Hindu temples from the government control. So now, if we fight for Hindu temples to get released, then how we could really, ensure there is a legal process to capture the Christian lands properties in India.
So I have been thinking about this for some time, right? So my thoughts are still evolving, right? So my answer is a tentative one. Okay. So uh, so the way I'm looking at it, okay. So if we had a dharmic government, okay, like the kings of the past, so they played a so if you go to Varanasi, what you'll find is you'll find the gods created by the various Maratha kings, right? So and then you find that everywhere you go to Tanjavur, you find the temples created by the Chora kings. Okay, so traditionally the divide between the secular and the religious did not exist in India. Okay, so the king also had a duty, a dharmic duty, to take care of religion, to to provide for the temples and maintain all of these things. Okay, so if we had a dharmic government, okay, and if we Hindus created political power, and then if we took over the government, and then we don't have to worry about government controlling the temples, okay, because then it will be a dharmic government. Okay, then my other thought is also Hindus are also not a homogeneous community, right? We are multilingual, we have different jatis, we have different traditions, and also there a lot of divisiveness have been planted by the Christians and by the British over the last 100, 200 years. And that means, let's say you take a temple and then you give control back to the community, to whom would you give it? Okay, so it's very easy for our enemies to instigate one jati against the other and say, look, I'm the one who should be having control over this. Okay, uh, that does not mean we should not regain control of that. But my thought, my tentative thought at this stage is, first one, use the weapon you already have. Okay, the weapon is you already have legal provisions by which the Hindu temples are government owned, and now use brute force, shock and awe works many times, to say now we are taking over the Christian temples. Okay, and use that wealth to fund public projects. Okay, building schools, building hospitals, do all these things, right? It's take the money and you say we are only serving the public, and so that way the resistance to that, at least from Hindus, will be eliminated. And I've always thought there is a clever thing we could do. What we can do is we can constitute a board. Let's say you take a district, right? You have this Vijayawada district, and then let's say the church property is totally worth 10,000 crore rupees there in the district. What you will say, uh, you know we'll constitute a board which will have proportional representation from each jati. Okay, if let's say the Kamar 20% of the population, the Harijans are 30%, and then the Reddis are 5%. Okay, we'll take proportional representation from this, and then they will manage the funds of this board. Okay, once you nationalize, they'll manage it, and it's human nature, right? And then you give them free run, they will swindle all the money. Okay, people will swindle all the money. Okay, and then it's for the same reason the people support politicians from their own jati today, even though they are corrupt. They will support these swindlers from their own jati, because a portion of the loot will come back to the jati. Okay, so I think sometimes we should follow the prescription of Krishna. Okay, and if needed, uh, do something which looks little adharmic in the short term, but will overall help establish dharma. So my first, I'm treating Christianity as a cancer, right? And then, like Satish ji mentioned the word mimetic virus, right? I explained in my book why it is a mimetic virus. Okay, so if you're fighting a cancer, if you're fighting a mimetic virus, the first thing is to get rid of it. Okay, then you can nurture the body. Okay, so for me, Hindus getting possession of the temples from the government and able to practice their own traditions is secondary. It is important, but it is secondary. But the first one is to get rid of uh, you know, uh, uh, Christianity and all of its institutions is the most important one.
Okay. Yeah, we have already spent 2 hours. Abhinji, please ask your question quickly, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, no more questions after this. We'll have more sessions.
Yeah.
Today's session, we must conclude.
Okay, Kalavai, a couple of questions. First one is, your book is priced a bit too high by Indian standards. So is there a way or an opportunity to publish it in India, maybe Garuda or whatever, so that the price is brought down? Second thing is that while attacking Christianity, is attacking the historicity of Christ a good idea, or would it be better to focus on the two things? One is the fundamental biblical mythology, the creation mythology, because that is the evolution is something that Christians are very afraid of. And even in India, I've seen none of the believing Christians believe in evolution. They will stick to the Adam and Eve theory. And second thing is that the focus on that it believes in one life. So can that be put on, like, if Jesus was really enlightened, he could not have said it is just one life followed by paradise and hell. He would have said something about the multiple lives, reincarnation, etc.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So the first one, I don't control the price of the book, and in fact, uh, all of the funding was done by Rajiv. Okay, for creating the book, meaning printing and all that. Okay, I did not take, and I do not take a single dime for any of my writings or any of the work I do. It's just my dharmic duty. And I think the way it has happened is, uh, Amazon controls the pricing, and then they tend to price it very high. And Rajiv and I have been working with another person to bring a low cost edition out in India. Okay, so I think that project has been kind of languishing a little bit, but I think that's something, Rajiv, we should fast track it and we should get it out at a lower price, because if the book can be printed and brought out at 150 to 100 rupees, which I think uh, that publisher who reached out to us was confident of doing, then that will reach a lot of people. And I think also if you can bring it out as electronic version, it can be a lot cheaper, right? You can price it really cheap, and we can do that. So that's something definitely we'll get back to you in the coming days, and then we'll have a plan for that. That's number one. Number two is attacking the historicity of Jesus versus highlighting uh, the various uh, problems, the teachings of Christianity. Okay, which is the right approach? Okay, or should we focus on something like evolution? So I'll start in the reverse order, focusing on evolution. Okay, so while if you look at the internet, right, like Richard Dawkins and a lot of biologists and others, uh, they fight evolution, right? Sorry, they fight for evolution, and then the Christians fight evolution. They resist it. In the US, there'll be regular lawsuits trying to throw evolution off the textbooks. Sure, the Christians are threatened by evolution, but we should also remember it's only the apologetic Christians who are threatened by evolution. Okay, the others may still be threatened by it when they come to know of it, but they do not understand what it is. Okay, so for most of them, they are completely oblivious to the nature of evolution, and hence, while that fight should be fought, uh, that's not going to cover everything. Okay, then second thing, uh, the teachings of Jesus, right? How they are evil, and how they are not dharmic, and how they are not going to help anyone in their spiritual progress, that needs to be brought out. Okay, then the historicity of Jesus should be attacked. It's not just one of them. I think what we need is multiple narratives. Okay, some of them will resonate with some people, right? I started something like the historicity because it's something which we can use very effectively, right? When the missionaries come, what are they trying to sell? They are not trying. So Hinduism is like a library, right? We talk about a Siddhanta, we talk about traditions, we talk about Bhakti literature. So uh, we have a lot to offer, but Christianity is a one-trick pony. Okay, for them it is Jesus. Okay, so any dagger you thrust into the heart of the Jesus story is going to destroy Christianity. Okay, so that's the reason I started with the historicity of Jesus. You challenge that, okay, and then the starting point is, look, historical Jesus never existed, and everything you are having is a lie. Okay, and then if we can condense that message in a popular format, that's going to throw a huge roadblock on the path of the Christians. And the second one is to uh, come up with a list of top 100 teachings of Christianity which are evil, right? And then create a simple narrative in all formats, video, lectures, and uh, powerful one-liners and everything. You create that, and then that's going to be very effective, right? So it has to be all of these things put together. It's not one or the other, and we should invest on all these.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
One thing, Rajivji, just 2 minutes. I think I wasn't very clear about the second question. It is in context of the Indians, the Hindus who have a deep reverence for Jesus. So here, if you look at it, first of all, even if you tell them that Jesus said so and so, he did so and so, they will always say these are interpolations in the Bible, and all these people were fanatics, and that's how they actually corrupted the character of Jesus. So in that case, I think a good thing is to say, look, okay, fine, accepted. If these people are enlightened, if he was really enlightened, he could not have asked for just one life. He would have definitely spoken of reincarnation. That is the point I'm raising. And evolution again is similarly.
So on that, yeah, I understood the point. See, on that point, right? Only a very, very small number of Hindus have a reverence for Jesus. Okay, this is a really small number. These are mostly English educated, very westernized, very urban Hindus. Okay, they are very small numerator of Hindus on a huge denominator of the Hindu population. Okay, so and they have a reverence for Jesus because they know nothing about Jesus, right? And then we don't have to reinforce that. And you see, this is why a lot of our gurus have tried doing that, right? And they will not attack Jesus, or they will even praise Jesus, and they will try to, uh, say, hey, you know what? Even Jesus did not say these things. Why are you missionaries doing, right? But then we had a very good writer. He's not active these days. Okay, Gopalakrishnan Subramanian, and he always used to ask, why should any Hindu buy, uh, you know, uh, the half Jesus that Moran Swami is selling them, when he can buy the full Jesus from the Christian missionaries? Okay, so the problem is. The problem with Christianity is Jesus, and there is no way getting around that. We have to attack Jesus. Okay, and how we do that? We have to calibrate based on the time, place, and circumstance, but not focusing on Jesus, his historicity, and his evil teachings. That will be a mistake. Okay, we have to focus on all of those things, and a section of Hindus will be offended, and then we have to treat them as enemies. Those first responders are actually the enemies of Dharma. They constitute the vanguard of the Christian movement, even though they remain namesake Hindus. And we should not ever calibrate our strategy based on what they want, especially because they are still a minuscule minority, and the vast majority of Hindus don't like Christianity, and we should use all of them.
Yeah, thank you for a wonderful session. It went over. We'll have many more of these. So every Sunday, please tune in. In this struggle, all of us are in together. All of us have to play some role. I'm not asking for everybody to play or become Kalavai, even though that would be ideal. But even if you spend some amount of your time and spend little of your resources into combating this virus that has been lingering on for 2000 years, it will go a long ways. With that, namaskars to all. Until next Sunday, we'll reconnect.
Namaskar and thanks everyone. And we'll connect again next weekend and continue with the next topic. And just one small correction to what Rajiv mentioned. Actually, every one of you can and should better than me. Okay, should become better than me, because what I have done, I'm only good at analyzing and writing certain things. Okay, and I'm not a very good speaker, and I'm not very articulate. And most of you would be able to do a vastly better job. And even the Q&A session, that's what I was observing. Many of you are asking, framing your questions in a way I can only feel jealous of. Okay, so I think uh, uh, with all of us coming together as a force, you will easily surpass what I'm doing, and that's what we are looking for. Thank you very much.